I grew up in a little fishing village in the north of Scotland, so from an early age I was deeply aware, I would say, of how not just the land but also the sea and the marine environment and its natural resources influence many things. Not just our economies, not just our jobs, but also our sense of place and our sense of who we are. What I'm probably interested in most of all is about how we can make our societies more resilient to the challenges we're facing now in the future, which means how we deal with pressures and shocks and stresses, doing this in a way that doesn't create new inequalities and doesn't further disadvantage people who are already perhaps marginalised or disempowered.
My main research focus is looking at social equity outcomes for people in changing energy systems from the current fossil fuel regime through to renewables or low carbon alternatives, because it impacts people. So as we choose or change technologies, different people benefit or have negative outcomes because of these changes. And so social equity is a way to measure these changes. The Japanese government has the aim to become carbon neutral by 2050. This is common with a lot of other nations around the world. This is not an extreme target by any means, but it is very ambitious for a nation like Japan.
Energy accounts for about 80% of Japan's total emissions, and it's heavily reliant on thermal power, so gas, coal, oil. A big problem is that since 2011, since the earthquake, tsunami and the Fukushima nuclear disaster, the restart of nuclear power reactors has been politically a very contentious and challenging issue, and that has served to only harden reliance on coal power in particular. We've found a few quite big barriers to realising a just transition in Japan. The first of these is perhaps quite low public awareness. My co-investigators have run some surveys with the Japanese public and with stakeholders from industries that have a vested interest in a transition.
In Japanese, the Japanese language words for the just transition would be kousei na iko. And this is a really tricky term. It means a just transition theoretically, but the words themselves are not in the common vernacular. The words actually mean a fair movement or a fair change, but there is a very low level of understanding of what this is, both conceptually and what it means sort of figuratively as well. In fact, one of our key survey findings was that the level of understanding of the concept of a just transition was almost nil. Just transitions have their roots in employment. So as you shift, for example, from coal to renewables, certain people will lose jobs and certain people will gain jobs. This is kind of the beginning of that conversation.
You have a lot of people who rely on working in coal and gas-fired power stations or in petrochemicals or steel. You also have a lot of peripheral regions and smaller cities and towns where the revenues that come in from power stations, from some of these big high-emitting activities, are really important for the local economy.
There are a number of ways to deal with this issue. So, for example, an engineer in a power station could be an engineer in a renewable energy power station. Re-education and being able to transition people into new or meaningful jobs is going to be the trick. I don't think we want to hollow out economically these groups of people just because we had a better idea or something is a lower carbon option.
And something that we're starting to see, but that's really, really, really vital, is to look at the skills that these workforces have and how these skills might become a force for good in creating fair and sustainable net zero jobs. One really super example of this is Iwaki City in Fukushima, where you have not only 2 nuclear power stations but also 4 thermal power stations powered by oil, gas and coal, where you have a lot of workers in these high emitting sectors. So Iwaki has become one of the first municipalities to introduce a certification scheme for maintenance workers for offshore wind turbines, whereby people can get certificates and training in being accredited maintenance technicians for offshore wind. What we would say is absolutely critical is empowering local governments in these places with the knowledge, the skills, the capabilities, so that they can identify and respond to opportunities as and when they arise.
Education is critical. We realise that unless people face a deliberate challenge in their lives, they don't seek information about the just transition. It's not of interest to them. And so it's probably our role as academics and the government's role as educators of the public to demonstrate what this means, what some of the trade-offs are, what some of the short-term and long-term benefits and also costs will be, such that people can be engaged in the process.